A tense hush settles over a small-town courtroom as the doors creak open, revealing a confident yet unassuming black woman dressed in a simple navy blue suit. She steps before a skeptical judge, Arthur Sterling, who radiates a sense of smug authority. From the very first moment, the judge's condescending glare dares anyone to question his power. At stake are her freedom, her very identity. Little does anyone in this room suspect they are standing in the presence of a secret force with the power to upend all their preconceived notions. In the clash of sneer and dignity, an explosive truth is about to be revealed, one that will ignite a whirlwind of karma like no other. In the sleepy heart of Cedar Creek County, a place where towering pine trees swayed gently against a gray sky, people assumed life passed quietly and predictably. The courthouse was small, really just an old two-story brick building with tarnished metal letters above the entrance that read Cedar Creek County Court. Inside, corridors were dimly lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. The place smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and decades of tense trials. The walls were lined with portraits of past judges, an endless array of stern white faces with solemn eyes. On this cold, drizzly morning, the usual quiet was broken by the shuffle of attorneys and the slow, echoing footsteps of bailiffs making their rounds. Simple but rigid wooden benches formed the gallery, where curious locals had gathered, hoping for something more exciting than the typical property dispute or petty theft case that populated their modest docket. Inside Courtroom B, the musty air bristled with the buzz of anticipation. At the front of the courtroom sat Judge Arthur Sterling, a towering figure with thinning silver hair combed meticulously to the side. He wore his black robe with the pomp of someone who had been told all his life he was destined for greatness. Some said he was a brilliant mind with a heart for justice. Others whispered that his ego was as large as the ancient oak outside. He had a habit of snapping his glasses off his face whenever he wanted to emphasize a point, a gesture that had become infamous among the local legal community. Seated at the defendant's table was a black woman in a navy blue suit, her posture straight and calm, her face revealing little of the storm swirling within. Her name was Lena Walker, though very few people in that courtroom actually knew the truth of who she was or what her presence there signified. The only thing the onlookers saw was a well-spoken black woman preparing to represent herself, and to some, that mere fact was almost scandalous. The sight of a defendant who had chosen to waive the usual right to an attorney drew a wave of curiosity, even confusion. Many in Cedar Creek County had not seen a pro-se defendant in years, especially not one who looked so poised, so certain of her own position. Judge Sterling's gaze swept across Lena with a dismissiveness that might have gone unnoticed by an untrained eye, but Lena registered it. She had faced men like this before, men who looked at her and thought they could sum up her worth in seconds, men who believed they could bend the law or even break it so long as it satisfied their own desires. What struck her most was that beneath the veneer of legal procedure, there was a flicker of prejudice. She recognized it immediately, the subtle arch of an eyebrow, the way his lips twitched downward at the corner, a hint of contempt lurking in his expression. Officially, Lena had been charged with assault. Unofficially, she had arrived in Cedar Creek County for an entirely different purpose. She didn't want to be here, not in the sense of being on the wrong side of the bench, but necessity had forced her hand. To keep her real operation under wraps, she had to stand trial as a civilian, maintain her cover, and keep the ultimate secret locked away until the very last moment. No one in this sleepy town had any notion they were hosting an undercover agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sitting at the prosecution's table was District Attorney Clara Doyle, a seasoned lawyer with short auburn hair and a reputation for being unstoppable. She'd built a case around allegations that Lena had attacked a local businessman named Victor Martel, an influential figure in Cedar Creek County known for his real estate dealings and connections. According to the charges, Lena had struck Martel outside the Crestview Motel after some sort of dispute. The official record labeled it assault with intent to harm, and the state had prepared to come down on Lena with frightening zeal. As proceedings began, the chatter in the gallery simmered to a low murmur. Judge Sterling called the room to order, the authority in his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Lena rose from her seat as he asked if she was ready to proceed with her defense. With an unwavering calm, she nodded. She did not fidget or hesitate. She had prepared for this moment carefully, yet the tension was undeniable. So much was riding on this, though no one else in that courtroom could have guessed. Lena was on a mission. She'd been stationed in Cedar Creek for over 3 months, working undercover as part of a covert investigation into a widespread corruption ring that involved money laundering, land grabbing, and even human trafficking. The FBI had quietly set its sights on Cedar Creek County thanks to some intangible leads that pointed to a broader, more sinister network. Victor Martel was only a small piece of a puzzle that extended beyond state lines. If Lena's cover was blown prematurely, the entire operation could fall apart. Every move she made had to be calculated. Yet here she was, facing a judge who looked down on her for more than just the alleged assault. His demeanor all but confirmed that her race and confident bearing had already triggered some unspoken biases. The question was, how far would those biases take him? Lena inhaled slowly, letting her gaze drift around the courtroom. She recognized the hush, the tension, the bright overhead lights that illuminated the dusty air. "Your Honor, I'm ready," she said, and her voice echoed with a polite confidence that belied her anxiety. As the judge raised his eyebrows at her, she could sense his skepticism. Her mind flicked back to her training at Quantico, the countless hours of learning to read micro-expressions, to glean from the slightest twitch or blink the thoughts churning in someone's mind. She felt certain that Sterling had already labeled her in his own mind. A troublemaker, an upstart, perhaps an arrogant defendant who believed she was above the law. If only he knew who she truly was and how far she stood above his petty scorn. The game was about to begin, and Lena felt both exasperation and dark amusement swirling within. She wasn't there to outsmart the judge, but she was prepared to meet any challenge he threw at her. For beyond the mere question of guilt or innocence, a grander conspiracy was unraveling, one that might swallow them both if they weren't careful. And so, with the shrill squeak of chairs against the polished floor, the stage was set. The first act of this extraordinary legal drama was about to unfold, and in that silent tension, one could almost feel the threads of fate twisting and turning, coiling in readiness for the chaos to come. From the very outset of the trial, Judge Sterling's approach to Lena was laced with quiet derision. The first sign came in the form of constant interruptions. Whenever Lena tried to present a point, Sterling was quick to interject with pedantic remarks, questioning her understanding of even the most basic procedures. Once or twice might have been defensible. Maybe he was clarifying her knowledge for the record. But as the trial progressed, his tone grew more pointed until it bordered on contempt. "You say you're representing yourself, Ms. Walker," he said at one point, leaning forward, his cold blue eyes peering at her over the rim of his half-moon glasses. "Are you sure you grasp the ramifications of your choice?" The faintest sneer tugged at his lips. "I'm aware of my constitutional right, Your Honor," Lena answered evenly. She made sure her voice was steady, polite, but firm enough to remind him that she was not a clueless amateur. "I'm prepared." In response, Sterling only gave a pompous nod. "We'll see," he said, tapping a pen against the bench. "We'll see if you're truly prepared or if this is just a misunderstanding of legal complexities." A whisper swept across the gallery, a few heads shaking in disapproval of the judge's attitude. But Sterling's reputation as an old-school authoritarian figure had been built over decades. Few lawyers or defendants had dared to challenge him, at least not successfully. Locals often joked that Sterling treated his courtroom like a private kingdom, complete with archaic rules and public humiliations for those who disappointed him. Meanwhile, District Attorney Clara Doyle wore a polite, almost apologetic expression each time the judge taunted Lena. She had a job to do, prosecute the alleged crime, but she could sense the judge's hostility was crossing a line. Doyle was a professional who believed in the process, and while she rarely showed mercy, she had a certain respect for the law's integrity. She'd spent enough years in the field to sense when a judge was leaning too hard on personal bias. Nonetheless, Clara had built a solid case. She wouldn't risk damaging it by stepping out of turn. Midway through the second day of the trial, Lena presented a piece of evidence she believed would exonerate her, or at least suggest a heavier burden of proof on the prosecution. After obtaining security camera footage from the Crestview Motel's entrance, she discovered a brief but critical excerpt that showed Victor Martel initiating physical contact. In the grainy footage, it appeared Martel had grabbed her wrist before she struck him in self-defense. This evidence could drastically change the jury's perspective, implying that Lena's action wasn't assault, but self-preservation. Judge Sterling barely glanced at the footage. "Ms. Walker," he said dismissively, "I find this evidence inconclusive. The resolution is poor, and it's difficult to ascertain the precise nature of the contact." Lena frowned. "Your Honor, you can clearly see Mr. Martel's hand on my arm if you follow the—" "Do not interrupt me," Sterling snapped, removing his glasses. The entire courtroom tensed. "You are not an attorney, yet you act as though you are intimately familiar with the rules of evidence. This clip is barely 2 seconds long. Anything could have occurred before or after. This single slice of time doesn't necessarily prove your innocence. You should be careful about how you present such fragments in my courtroom." A suppressed snicker broke out somewhere in the gallery. Lena turned her head, searching for the culprit, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. But she refused to show anger. Instead, she inhaled slowly, gripping the edges of the defendant's table, reminding herself that she had endured far worse indignities during her undercover operations. The last thing she wanted was to blow her cover by letting emotions override her training. Judge Sterling proceeded to lecture Lena about the fundamental rules of the courtroom. He warned her not to grandstand with pieces of evidence that might mislead the jury, adding a condescending aside. "I know you may not have the benefit of a law school degree, Ms. Walker, but in my courtroom, half measures or incomplete images will not suffice. Do you understand?" A flicker of anger crossed Lena's face. This was more than condescension. It was humiliation. Ordinarily, she might have countered with a pointed legal reference, but that would raise suspicion. She had to maintain the appearance of a woman untrained in the intricacies of law. So she swallowed her pride and simply nodded, letting him believe he had the upper hand. "Yes, Your Honor," she said softly. Across the aisle, Clara Doyle studied the evidence with a more thoughtful expression. She didn't protest the judge's ruling, but Lena could tell the prosecutor was taking mental note. Clara might be unwavering in her desire to prosecute, but she wasn't blind to Martel's questionable behavior. The path to discovering Lena's true motives, her real identity, was long, but each piece of the puzzle was being laid out for those keen enough to see. During the lunch break, Lena stepped outside the courthouse into a damp courtyard. A light drizzle feathered across her hair and cheeks. She found a quiet bench and pulled out her phone, checking her messages. A single text from a blocked number read, "We're close to finalizing the operation. Continue as planned." She tensed. This indicated the Bureau was ready to move, possibly soon. She would have to keep her composure. Any slip-up in front of Sterling or the prosecution could compromise everything. She sat there, replaying the judge's words in her mind. Who was Sterling to belittle her intelligence? She had excelled at the FBI Academy in Quantico, an institution known worldwide for rigorous training, where her capacity for quick analysis, unwavering composure, and empathy had all been tested and refined. The judge mocked her ignorance, ironically oblivious to the staggering truth of her identity. Deep down, Lena itched to deliver a scathing comeback, but she knew her role here was crucial. Her operation in Cedar Creek County wasn't just about putting corrupt local officials behind bars. It was tied to a larger federal investigation. The corruption that implicated Victor Martel and potentially others in the county's hierarchy might lead to a chain of indictments across state lines. She couldn't risk revealing her true self yet. The mission demanded secrecy, even if that meant enduring racist undercurrents and public ridicule in open court. So be it. The judge's mockery would become an afterthought if the entire operation succeeded. For now, she had to let the slights roll off her back like the raindrops rolling off her coat. With that thought, Lena returned to the building, bracing herself for yet another round of humiliations from a judge who believed her incompetent. She had no intention of letting him break her. After all, the time would come when the illusions would shatter, and the truth would be laid bare for everyone to witness, Judge Sterling included. Little did he know that his patronizing attitude was sowing the seeds of his own downfall, and that time of reckoning was fast approaching. Outside the legal proceedings, Cedar Creek County presented itself as the quintessential American small town. Family-owned diners boasting the best cherry pie this side of the Mississippi, a quaint main street lined with boutique shops, and a local community theater performing an amateur rendition of our town once a year. Tourists passing through might find it charming, even idyllic. But under that veneer lay secrets as dark as the looming pine forests at night. As the days wore on, Lena delved deeper into Cedar Creek's underbelly during her free hours. Although her official role was that of a defendant scrambling to salvage her reputation, her real work was far more complex. She reached out to confidential sources, residents who had grown tired of the corruption and exploitation that thrived beneath the surface. One such source was Esther Vance, a soft-spoken middle-aged librarian who had quietly documented shady land deals orchestrated by Victor Martel. Esther believed these deals were just the tip of the iceberg, linked to a larger web of criminal enterprises stretched all the way to the southern border. When Lena met Esther in the back aisle of the Cedar Creek Library, shielded by tall shelves stacked with old, yellowing books, she carefully extracted details of transactions that painted a horrifying picture. Properties being acquired at suspiciously low prices, local officials signing off on questionable permits, entire neighborhoods uprooted for so-called developments that never came to fruition. Somewhere along the line, Lena realized money was being laundered through these real estate machinations. "Everyone's too scared to speak up," Esther whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. She was certain hidden cameras lurked in every corner. Martel's got friends in high places. The sheriff, the mayor, even some of the folks in the county records office. I've seen the intimidation. People who protest vanish. When the police investigate, they call it a runaway case. No real leads. Everyone is too afraid to cross him. Lena nodded sympathetically, gently placing a hand on Esther's trembling fingers. She had to be careful not to disclose too much of her real purpose. "I appreciate your courage," she said quietly. "We'll find a way to make this right. All I need is the chain of evidence, something that can stand up to scrutiny." Esther produced a folder of photocopied documents, signatures, bank statements with redacted names, property transfer logs. Lena thanked her, promising to keep her identity confidential. As she slipped out the library's back door, she felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation. She was balancing a precarious position, a defendant on trial for assault, and an undercover FBI agent hunting evidence of a criminal conspiracy. And all the while, a prejudiced judge was orchestrating a biased courtroom spectacle. In a shadowy corner of Cedar Creek's single coffee shop, Lena reviewed the folder's contents. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became. Victor Martel was not just an unscrupulous businessman. He was a key cog in a far-reaching machine. The corruption had legs, and the more Lena uncovered, the more Cedar Creek County appeared to be a crucial hub. But just how high did this go? Was Judge Sterling himself involved? Had he accepted bribes or turned a blind eye to Martel's deals? It would explain his hostility in court. Maybe he was trying to ruin Lena's credibility before she could blow the lid off everything. The next day's court session opened with a flurry of excitement. District Attorney Clara Doyle called Victor Martel to the stand to share his version of events. Martel strode to the witness stand in a tailored gray suit, his expression smug. He cast a cursory glance at Lena, a glint of malice in his eyes, as if to say, "I've already won." Martel recounted a dramatic tale of Lena attacking him without provocation, painting himself as a concerned businessman who merely asked her to leave his property. He feigned shock and claimed Lena had physically assaulted him out of nowhere. The performance was worthy of an amateur stage actor, full of exaggerated gestures and sanctimonious indignation. Lena, aware of the precariousness of her position, cross-examined carefully. She drew attention to inconsistencies in his timeline, prompting him to contradict himself. For example, he first claimed the entire altercation took place near the motel parking lot, but then stated they'd exchanged words in the lobby. His memory wavered about the time. At one moment, he said it happened late in the evening. In another moment, he claimed it was early afternoon. Each slip introduced a hairline crack in his veneer of victimhood. Judge Sterling, however, intervened repeatedly to halt Lena's questions. He complained that she was leading the witness or harping on insignificant details. The more Lena pressed Martel, the more the judge's hackles rose, as though each clarifying question Lena asked personally affronted him. At one point, when Lena caught Martel in a direct lie about whether a security guard was on duty that day, the judge abruptly declared a brief recess, denying her the chance to press further. The tension in the courtroom soared. Onlookers shifted uncomfortably, sensing that Lena was onto something, yet the judicial authority refused to let her pursue it. Whispers spread through the gallery. Was the judge partial to Martel? As Lena stood by the defendant's table, sorting through her notes, her heart hammered in her chest. She felt the burning injustice of this stacked deck, but she also felt a surge of determination. The judge's attempts to muzzle her only confirmed what she suspected. There was a reason he wanted her silenced. Sometimes bias was just bias, but sometimes it shielded a deeper corruption. For now, she kept a straight face, abiding by the judge's orders. But the minute he banged his gavel to signal recess, Lena slipped into the corridor and made a quick phone call to her bureau contact. She quietly relayed a coded message, indicating that Martel was lying under oath and that she suspected the judge might be complicit. On the other end, she received instructions to hold her ground and keep collecting evidence. If the judge's corruption was proven, that would be all the more reason to proceed carefully. She ended the call, adjusting her jacket as she walked back into the courtroom. She passed Martel, who stared at her with a mix of contempt and smugness. Her eyes narrowed. She dealt with criminals and crooked officials before, but there was something chilling in Martel's brazen swagger. He acted like a man who believed he could do anything and get away with it. Lena refused to cower. She had arrived in Cedar Creek determined to topple a house of cards built on deceit. If that meant orchestrating her own defense while unraveling a multi-state corruption scheme, then so be it. She'd cling to her composure, keep playing her role until the day came when Judge Sterling, Victor Martel, and anyone else entangled in this wicked enterprise would be forced to face the truth. After a particularly harrowing morning session, where once again Judge Sterling had belittled Lena and shot down a crucial witness she tried to call, Lena found herself in a quiet hallway on the courthouse's second floor. The faint hum of a vending machine provided the only background noise. She was leaning against a worn wooden railing, head bowed, breathing deeply to compose herself. So far, the trial felt like a farce. No matter how rational or logical her arguments, the judge found ways to dismiss or dilute them. One part of her yearned to rip off the mask and reveal her FBI badge to put Sterling in his place. But that would blow months of painstaking work. The operation came first. Her mind wandered back to her time at the FBI Academy. She remembered standing on the crisp lawns of the sprawling Quantico training facility, the morning air biting at her cheeks during endurance runs. She recalled the camaraderie of her classmates, the rigorous training in interrogation techniques, evidence analysis, and infiltration strategies. She had excelled in her field training exercises, rising to the top of her class. Yet none of that training had truly prepared her for the emotional weight of being mocked in a court of law, being forced to appear inept and incompetent while she was in fact more qualified than most attorneys in that building. She inhaled, recalling the vow she made to protect and serve. This mission was about more than self-respect. It was about ensuring that Victor Martel's wide-reaching criminal enterprise finally met justice. It was about the families who had lost their homes, the neighbors who had gone missing, and the future victims that could be saved if she succeeded. She heard footsteps. Opening her eyes, she saw a face she recognized from earlier in the trial. Clara Doyle, the district attorney, approached quietly, her expression conflicted. In her hand, she clutched a manila folder. Lena straightened, bracing for a hostile confrontation, perhaps more intimidation or some slick move to corner her. Instead, Doyle gestured for Lena to follow her into a small lounge area where a battered coffee maker hissed in protest at being used too often. "I'm not supposed to talk to you outside the courtroom," Doyle began in a hushed tone, "but I need you to hear something. Off the record." She glanced around, ensuring no one else was present. Lena raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Doyle pursed her lips. "I'm aware the judge is being unusually harsh with you. I don't condone his manner, and I'm not blind to the possibility that something bigger is at play here. But I have a job to do. I took an oath too. I have to prosecute when I believe a crime's been committed." "Understood," Lena replied carefully, studying Doyle's body language. She seemed earnest, perhaps even weighed down by guilt. "Why tell me this now?" Doyle exhaled, lowering her voice. "Because the evidence I've gathered suggests you were at the Crestview Motel under suspicious circumstances, and not just for assault. We know you've been in contact with some of the locals who are known to investigate Martel. The question is why?" Lena's heart pounded, but she kept her face neutral. "I've told you I was there minding my own business. Martel confronted me." Doyle gave a short nod, neither confirming nor denying. "Look, Ms. Walker, Judge Sterling is pushing this case to move fast. Too fast. He's pressuring me to lock in a conviction quickly, which is unusual for a judge who normally hears out both sides. It's as if he wants your trial done yesterday. Lena's eyes flickered. And you're suspecting? What exactly? I'm suspecting that maybe you're not the real target, Doyle admitted. Martel is known for shady deals, but he's also funded a lot of local campaigns. Sterling's campaign for the bench was largely financed by wealthy donors, including some individuals linked to Martel. But proof, that's more complicated. Lena felt her pulse quicken. So Sterling's partiality likely wasn't just arrogance or racism. It might well be corruption. She nodded slightly. Is that all you came to say? Doyle hesitated. There's a rumor that you come from some sort of law enforcement background. Don't ask me for details on how I know that. The point is, if you truly have reason to investigate Martel and his associates, maybe you can find the proof we need. I can't help you directly, but I also can't stand by and watch an innocent person get railroaded by corrupt powers. The directness of Doyle's statement stunned Lena. She had to tread carefully. I'm not at liberty to discuss my background, she replied softly. Let's just say I plan to defend myself with everything I have. Then I hope you succeed, Doyle said, her eyes sincere. I have to keep up appearances in that courtroom, but, well, let's just say I'm rooting for justice, however it comes. With that, she handed over a discreet note. These are some contacts, people who might know more about Martel's network. Do with it what you will. If you get the evidence, I'll make sure it finds the light of day. Lena accepted the note quietly, thanking Doyle. The moment was surreal, like they were conspirators against a common foe. But Lena understood they each had their roles. Doyle was the public face of the prosecution, bound by professional obligations. Lena was the unsuspecting defendant whose real identity could blow the case wide open. Together, they might just bring down the hammer of justice. That afternoon, returning to court, Lena felt a renewed sense of purpose. If the district attorney herself smelled a rat, then Lena wasn't alone in suspecting Judge Sterling was compromised. The real question became how to expose him without jeopardizing the FBI's ongoing operation. When the session resumed, Sterling launched into another lecture, scolding Lena for calling a witness, an ex-employee of Martel, without properly informing the court in advance. Lena explained that she'd only located the witness the night before, but Sterling shot her down with a sneering claim that this wasn't trial by ambush. He effectively barred the testimony from being heard. The jurors exchanged puzzled looks, uncertain why a judge would stifle potentially illuminating testimony. Lena caught Doyle watching from the prosecution's table, her lips pursed. If Sterling's bias had been subtle before, it was now glaringly obvious. The jurors might not see the bigger picture, but even they seemed discomforted by the judge's one-sided rulings. Some glanced at Lena with pity, others with curiosity. The tension in the room was as thick as the swirling dust motes under the fluorescent lights. Outside, gray clouds gathered over Cedar Creek County, as though reflecting the storm that was about to break. Lena could feel the weight of the note in her jacket pocket, the leads from Doyle, and she wondered how soon she could act on them. Exposing Martel was paramount, but bringing Sterling's suspected corruption to light would require evidence, hard facts, something so undeniable that neither he nor any other official could bury it. Night blanketed Cedar Creek County. In a cramped motel room on the outskirts of town, Lena hunched over a small desk scattered with evidence. The single overhead light flickered, casting shifting shadows on the cheap panel walls. She chewed the end of a pen as she meticulously compiled a timeline of Victor Martel's shady land acquisitions and Judge Sterling's rulings in favor of certain developers. If she could establish a pattern linking the judge's decisions to Martel's financial interests, it might be enough to blow their hidden alliance wide open. At the broken chain-link fence near the entrance, Lena spotted a figure huddled under a large coat. Her instincts told her to keep her hand near her holster. She approached slowly. "You the one who texted me?" she called softly. The figure stepped forward, revealing a wiry man with sunken cheeks and darting eyes. He introduced himself as Mark. Lena recognized the name from the note Doyle gave her. Mark had once worked as a property scout for Martel before growing a conscience and quitting under suspicious circumstances. Mark's voice trembled, betraying deep fear. "He's dangerous. You have no idea." "I've got an idea," Lena replied, stepping closer. "What can you tell me?" Mark lit a cigarette, taking a shaky puff. Martel's laundering money through shell companies. The judge signs off on any legal disputes that challenge Martel's acquisitions. Always rules in his favor. I used to be the one forging signatures on some of the property deeds. He exhaled smoke, as though purging guilt from his chest. I tried to speak up. My wife received threats in the mail, a bullet in an envelope. That's when I knew I had to get out. Lena nodded gravely. I'm sorry. She gently pressed him for more details. Is there proof of Sterling's involvement? Money transfers? Suspicious bank deposits? Mark nodded. I have digital records. Some I stole before I ran. You'd be surprised how sloppy they got. I can't go to the cops. The sheriff is in Martel's pocket. Lena's pulse quickened. I can protect you, but only if you hand over that evidence. It might help me blow this case wide open. Mark studied her face. You're not just some random woman defending herself, are you? Trust me, Mark, she said quietly. I'm on the side of the law. He gave a dry, humorless laugh. All right, I'll hand you the records, but you better promise you'll use them. I've risked everything just by meeting you. They moved into the sawmill's husk of a building, stepping over broken boards and twisted metal. In one corner, Mark dug through a dusty tarp and retrieved a battered laptop. Its screen flickered to life after a few attempts to power it on. Loading a folder of incriminating files, he transferred them to a flash drive. Lena watched the progress bar creep forward, feeling both triumph and dread. This evidence could incinerate the illusions that protected Martel and Sterling, but the moment such evidence went live, the stakes soared. When the transfer finished, Mark handed Lena the flash drive, his hands trembling. Get me out of this, he whispered. I can't keep running. Lena placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. I'll do everything in my power. A faint noise echoed through the building, footsteps crunching glass. They both froze. Lena quickly pocketed the flash drive, her hand slipping to her holster. Someone's here, she whispered. Mark's eyes went wide with panic. They doused the laptop screen and slid behind a half-collapsed wall. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the sawmill's interior. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She heard hushed voices, footsteps methodically searching the place. Mark tugged at her sleeve, terror etched on his face. Lena motioned for him to stay calm. She strained her ears to catch the intruder's words. One voice hissed, must be around here somewhere. Let's check that corner. Lena quickly gauged their chances. 2 or 3 men from the sound of it, probably armed. Mark was in no condition to fight back. She had only her sidearm, and her priority was to protect the witness and the evidence. A confrontation could blow her cover, but being discovered might prove fatal. She motioned for Mark to crawl away quietly, pointing to an opening in the far wall. As the footsteps came closer, Lena readied her weapon. One of the flashlights glimmered off rusted machinery. She counted down in her head, 3, 2, 1. Suddenly, the intruder's phone rang, the shrill tones slicing through the silence. One man cursed, answering it under his breath. Lena seized the distraction. She guided Mark silently to the exit. They slipped through the broken boards, footsteps muffled by the soggy ground outside, the wind howling like a banshee. She didn't relax until they reached the tree line. From a safe vantage point, they saw 3 shadowy figures stepping out of the building. One man was on the phone, scanning the perimeter with his flashlight. Another glared at their surroundings, a gun glinting at his hip. After a tense moment, they retreated to a black SUV parked down the road. Its headlights flicked on, and it sped off. Mark exhaled in relief, nearly collapsing. They would have killed us. I know it. Lena nodded grimly, helping him stay upright. I'll get you somewhere safe tonight. I know a place. With one last glance at the incriminating evidence on her laptop screen, Lena closed her eyes and let exhaustion claim her for a few hours. Tomorrow, she'd face Sterling in court again, and soon, very soon, she'd reveal the truth that would shake him to his core. Morning dawned on Cedar Creek County, the storm clouds lingering but withholding their rain. Back in the courthouse's corridor, Lena went through the motions, security checks, glances from curious onlookers, silent judgments from the court officials. She held her head high, keeping her expression neutral. Deep inside, she was coiled like a spring, ready to act. District Attorney Clara Doyle looked less composed than usual, her brow creased with worry. Perhaps she suspected something was afoot. She caught Lena's eye across the hallway and gave a subtle nod, as though to say, "Are you ready?" Lena offered a slight nod in return. She was more than ready. She'd spent the early morning hours confirming her plan. She had emailed the incriminating files to multiple secure FBI addresses, along with instructions to release them publicly if she became incapacitated or forced out of contact. She'd also shared them with Clara in an encrypted manner, though she didn't admit as much to the district attorney. Now, all that remained was to maneuver Sterling and Martel into a corner where they'd be forced to face the facts. When the court session convened, Sterling arrived looking uncharacteristically tense. He wasted no time calling Lena and Clara to approach the bench. "We're concluding this trial today," he announced, his voice echoing with a forced authority. "Closing arguments will be made this afternoon, and I'll instruct the jury." "Understood." Clara began to protest that the prosecution had more witnesses to call, but Sterling cut her off. "We've heard enough, Ms. Doyle. I will not allow this trial to drag on unnecessarily." Lena stared at him, unflinching. She noted the subtle tremor in his hand when he adjusted his papers. He was anxious, likely aware that the noose was tightening around Martel and, by extension, himself. No doubt he wanted this case wrapped up before anything else could leak. Outside the courtroom, Lena slipped a small note to Clara, letting her know to prepare for an unexpected development. The district attorney gave a tight nod. She had done her part, lodging that strategic objection to pave the way for Lena's final reveal. When court reconvened, Clara delivered her closing argument in a subdued manner, an odd move for a prosecutor known for her fiery summations. She insisted that Lena had used excessive force, that Martel's injuries were proof of more than simple self-defense. The jury listened, but her heart didn't seem in it. Once she concluded, Judge Sterling prepared to dismiss the jury for deliberation. At that precise moment, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom flew open. A hush fell as uniformed federal agents strode in, crisp suits and stern expressions on display. Leading them was Special Agent David Chun, Lena's bureau contact. Sterling's gavel hovered midair, his mouth ajar. The entire gallery erupted in gasps. "Judge Sterling," Agent Chun declared, "we are here to execute a federal warrant for the arrest of Victor Martel and associates on charges of money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy." He paused, scanning the stunned faces. "And possible judicial corruption." The judge's face blanched. This is an outrage. "You have no jurisdiction here without my approval." Chun raised an eyebrow, brandishing an official document. "This warrant was signed by the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Your approval is not required, Your Honor." The gallery broke into chaotic murmurs. Martel jumped to his feet, stammering denials. Sterling looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. Before anyone could react further, Lena calmly stood and strode to the middle of the courtroom. "I can corroborate these accusations," she said, voice ringing with authority. Chun nodded. "Ms. Walker, would you care to identify yourself for the record?" Lena locked eyes with Sterling. Lena Walker, Special Agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, on an undercover assignment to investigate Victor Martel's illicit activities. She slid a hand into her jacket pocket and withdrew her badge, lifting it for the entire courtroom to see. A collective gasp echoed off the walls. For a split second, Sterling sputtered. His gavel clattered onto the bench, an echo of finality. Martel nearly sank to the floor, shock contorting his face. Even Clara Doyle feigned astonishment for the benefit of the jury, though she'd suspected something like this all along. "This is highly irregular," Sterling finally roared, trying to salvage his authority. "How dare you lie to this court?" Lena turned to him, her composure radiating. "With all due respect, Your Honor, your repeated dismissals and attacks on my credibility forced me to conceal my identity until the right moment. I have tangible proof linking you, Victor Martel, and a network of individuals to corrupt land deals and financial crimes." Pandemonium broke loose. The jury whispered in disbelief. Some spectators exclaimed, while others craned their necks to see Lena's badge. Sterling attempted to pound his gavel, but a federal agent stepped forward, leveling a calm, stern look at him. The implication was clear: don't make this worse for yourself. Chun ordered several agents to approach Martel, placing him under arrest. A pair of them advanced toward Sterling, who trembled with rage. "You have no right," he barked, but even as he shouted, the futility of his position was plain. He was cornered by the law he claimed to uphold. Lena gave a curt nod to Clara, who solemnly watched the unraveling of the man she'd been forced to address as Your Honor. The district attorney stepped forward to gather the official documents from Agent Chen. She cleared her throat, turning to the stunned onlookers. "Members of the jury," she said, her voice loud and steady. "I think we have new evidence to consider." Then she gazed at Lena, her expression containing both apology and admiration. Or perhaps the prosecution should move for a mistrial, given these extraordinary developments. Sterling let out a strangled sound. He was still wearing his black robe, but the respect it commanded had evaporated. Martel, handcuffed, spewed curses and insults, promising revenge, but no one was listening. Lena stepped forward to address the gallery. "I regret the deception, but it was necessary to fully cover the scope of corruption permeating Cedar Creek County." Then she faced the judge directly. "And you, Judge Sterling, mocked me time and again, questioning my intelligence, my right to defend myself. You tried to silence me from presenting evidence. I only wish you had asked yourself why I was so steadfast. Maybe then you would have realized this day was coming." In the corner of the courtroom, Mark stood timidly, having crept in amidst the commotion. He met Lena's gaze and gave her a grateful nod, tears glistening in his eyes. The unmasking was complete. The air in the courtroom crackled with the charged energy of retribution. Lena felt the tension in her chest dissipate as Sterling confronted his downfall. And though her mission wasn't fully concluded, there would be depositions, arrests, reams of paperwork. This was the apex of her month-long undercover work. Justice, at last, was not no longer a mere possibility. It was a reality unfolding before every disbelieving eye in Cedar Creek County. One of the federal agents recited Sterling's rights as they prepared to escort him from the bench. The judge seemed on the verge of collapse, sputtering about legal technicalities that would never see the light of day. Meanwhile, Lena stood quietly, reflecting on the dramatic turn of events. Karma indeed had come calling, and it was swift, final, and unequivocal. In the swirling chaos of that afternoon, news spread across Cedar Creek County like wildfire. The once revered Judge Arthur Sterling had been taken into custody, paraded in handcuffs from his own bench to a waiting black SUV, escorted by grim-faced federal agents. Photographers and local reporters rushed to the courthouse steps, capturing the scene that would become a regional headline for weeks. Judge accused of corruption arrested in breathtaking courtroom sting. Victor Martel's arrest also reverberated. In the days that followed, more warrants were executed, targeting the sheriff's office, certain council members, and well-connected business owners. Cedar Creek County's entire power structure quaked. Town residents flocked to the diner and barber shop, clamoring for information about the FBI's secret operation. They whispered about the black woman defendant who turned out to be a federal agent, an iron-willed champion who refused to be beaten down by prejudice and corruption. Lena Walker, her cover now lifted, was escorted out of the courthouse by Agent Chen. She was greeted with hushed awe. Many of the local court employees who once eyed her with suspicion now glanced at her with respect. Even Clara Doyle, who had pursued an assault conviction against her, offered a handshake and a quiet apology. The charges against Lena were summarily dropped, the entire case nullified by the explosive revelations. She had never been the true defendant anyway. She'd only played that role to keep the criminals unsuspecting. Yet the real moment of karmic satisfaction arrived a week later during a federal hearing held in Richmond at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Sterling appeared in shackles, no longer garbed in the black robe he once wore with such superiority. Martel, his arrogance subdued, sat beside him. Evidence from Mark's flash drive was presented in damning detail: property deeds, bank transactions, emails referencing hush payments. The hearing was a formality to confirm probable cause, but the chain of incriminating data was so thorough that a grand jury indictment was virtually guaranteed. Lena testified, her demeanor precise and unwavering, describing how she discovered ties between Sterling's favorable rulings and Martel's under-the-table payouts. She recounted the judge's courtroom behavior, his obstruction of her defense, and how it reflected a broader pattern of judicial misconduct. Sterling tried to object, but the federal judge silenced him, explaining that he was now the one facing serious criminal charges and had no authority to interrupt. The irony was thick and bitter, a public comeuppance for a man who had once thrived on humiliating defendants. Outside the federal courthouse, as cameras flashed and reporters clamored for statements, Lena stood tall, carefully choosing her words. She expressed gratitude to the townspeople who had the courage to come forward, from Esther Vance to Mark, and commended Clara Doyle for her integrity in the face of mounting pressure. She acknowledged that while Cedar Creek's corruption had run deep, it was never too late for justice. The press devoured her every word, framing her as a heroic figure who fought not just racism and prejudice, but an entire crooked system. In Cedar Creek County itself, the vacant judge's seat became the subject of speculation. The State Judiciary Commission would appoint a temporary judge until proper elections could be held. No matter who filled that chair, the stain of Sterling's betrayal would linger. The locals began to re-evaluate their trust in long-standing officials, asking harder questions, demanding greater transparency. A small wave of reforms sprang up, calls for citizen oversight committees, new rules for campaign financing. Rumor had it that Esther Vance might even run for a county clerk position. Lena, for her part, had already moved on to the next stage of her FBI career. After packing her motel room and saying goodbye to the safe house where Mark had found refuge, she drove back to Washington, D.C. One afternoon, she found herself standing in front of the J. Edgar Hoover Building, the FBI's headquarters, delivering a detailed debrief to her superiors. They commended her for executing a successful undercover operation despite the extraordinary personal challenges and humiliations she had endured in that courtroom. The final measure of karmic justice came when Lena received an update. Sterling, out on bail but disgraced, was spotted at a supermarket wearing everyday clothes, head hung low, eyes darting as if expecting to be recognized and ridiculed at any moment. He was a fallen idol in his own community, the subject of mocking jokes and outraged condemnation. He had lost everything: his position, his respect, and the illusions of grandeur he had clung to for so long. Meanwhile, Lena had earned the admiration of many, from Cedar Creek residents to the highest ranks of the FBI. It was a reminder that in the end, no matter how high someone climbs, if they build their ascent on corruption, bigotry, or cruelty, they can, and often will, topple with stunning force. The very law Sterling had weaponized against others had finally come calling for him, guided by the unlikely defendant he had so derided. And perhaps that was the ultimate lesson for Cedar Creek County. For all who watch the drama unfold, justice can arrive in the most unexpected form. Mockery might persist for a season, but truth finds its way. And for those who sneer at innocence and virtue, karma often isn't just a concept. It's a sentence carried out in broad daylight, as cameras click and the world bears witness. When Lena reflected on everything that had transpired in Cedar Creek County, she felt a sense of closure, as warm and comforting as the morning sun. She had faced mockery, prejudice, and an imbalanced court system. She had stood up against a powerful judge and a manipulative businessman, and she had won, not merely for herself, but for an entire community ensnared in corruption. Back in Washington, Lena continued her responsibilities with the FBI, but her mind often drifted back to Cedar Creek. She remembered the hush of that old courthouse, the condescending glare of Judge Sterling, the whispered confessions of frightened locals. She remembered the sense of righteous fury that coursed through her veins each time the judge tried to silence her. But more than anything, she remembered the triumph of that moment when she revealed her badge, when Sterling's eyes widened in disbelief, and when karma finally struck him like lightning. The Cedar Creek case became something of a legend at the Bureau, a testament to Lena's unwavering resolve. While some operations ended quietly, overshadowed by bigger headlines, this one captured the public imagination. The story spread online, fueling discussions about judicial accountability, racial prejudice, and the heroism of standing firm against corruption, no matter the personal cost. Perhaps the greatest vindication, though, came from the simple words of thanks she received. A letter from Esther Vance arrived in Lena's office mailbox weeks later, expressing gratitude for shining a light in a dark place. "People here are starting to talk openly now," Esther wrote. "They're not afraid like they used to be. It's like a fog has lifted. Thank you for giving us our courage back." Lena read those lines with a hint of a smile. She had done her job, her duty, yes, but also a profound moral calling. In the grand scheme of federal operations, Cedar Creek might have been just a piece of a larger puzzle. Yet that small county's transformation was tangible. Real lives were changed, real oppressors brought to justice, and a new era, however fragile, was beginning. In quiet moments, Lena remembered the tension in Sterling's courtroom, how every condescending remark had felt like a blow. But she also remembered that final day, how a hush fell over the room, how her heart pounded as she stepped forward to reveal her true identity. She thought about how fleeting power could be. Sterling's entire empire of intimidation collapsed in one breathtaking instant, undone by the very laws he was sworn to uphold. And so, life moved on. Court calendars were rearranged, new judges were appointed, trials resumed under less oppressive gazes. Cedar Creek County discovered that it had voices that demanded honesty and equality in the halls of justice. No one forgot Lena Walker. Some said her presence was like a cleansing wind, sweeping out the stale corruption and letting fresh air in. As for Lena, she carried the lessons of Cedar Creek with her. The next time she donned her undercover persona or walked into a potentially hostile environment, she would recall how quickly a smug judge could be brought low by the truth. She would hold fast to the conviction that real justice might be delayed, but it would never be denied. And if it required resilience, wit, and the cunning to endure the mockery of men like Sterling, she was ready. Because the law, when wielded by someone of integrity, could topple the most arrogant fortress. Those who scorned her for being a woman, for being black, for standing up for herself, at the end of it all, they were the ones who fell. And that was how it should be. A promise fulfilled, a balance restored. If you were inspired by this powerful story of resilience and truth triumphing over corruption, there's more to share. We've seen how one person's unwavering determination can dismantle an entrenched system, how a seemingly ordinary individual can challenge authority and expose hidden wrongs. Lena Walker's tale proves that we each carry the power to pursue justice, no matter our background, no matter the odds. Now, I invite you to keep this spirit of courage and transformation alive. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you found yourself cheering for Lena and craving more stories of strength, justice, and hope. By doing so, you become part of a community that refuses to stay silent, that stands for integrity in every corner of society. Together, let's spread the message that truth and fairness still matter, and that we're all capable of being the spark that changes the world.